Namaste and greetings. I, Dr. Sauravi Himire, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, प्रभाव एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. We are gathered today for the last day of a 3-day immersive online legal awareness and certificate training program on women's rights, laws, and policies in India. This training course is organized by IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, or GISC. This course will be conducted by various expert resource persons comprising academicians, advocates, where women's concerns and issues will especially be addressed and reflected vis-a-vis enforcements of rights, concerned laws, and sectoral policies. The chair for this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel, visiting distinguished professor, IMPRI, and eminent economist and feminist scholar. Our experts for the training course are Professor Dr. Saumya Uma, Advocate Sanchita Ain, Professor Vishal Narain, Advocate Dr. Albertina Almeida, Dr. Amar Jasani, Ms. Urvashi Prasad, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, Professor Vijayalakshmi Nanda, and Dr. Nivedita P. Haran. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting the time, energy, and efforts into understanding emerging issues concerning the impacts of policies in promoting gender equality and helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful policy research and action. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources from our experts in your email for your kind perusal. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind the housekeeping announcements once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions on the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee and ensure that the questions are precise. Kindly refrain from making any general comments in the question to save time. Now, without any further ado, let us begin our program. It is my honor to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel to start the program with her opening remarks and recap of yesterday's deliberation. Welcome, ma'am, and over to you.
Needs to be
Good evening, dear participants, and welcome Dr. Vijayalakshmi Nanda, Dr. Ms. Urvashi Prasad, and Dr. Nivedita for this today's third day of our immersive online awareness course and certificate training program on women's rights, laws, and policies in India. We have got excellent resource persons as well as the participation, very active participation from over 150 participants. We also, the very first day, a comprehensive overview was given by Dr. Saumya Uma on role of women's movement and how it resulted in series of legal reforms and the policies and a contribution of Indian women even in the global debate. After that, we had a Sanchita Prasad, who is a practicing lawyer in Supreme Court. She also shared her personal experiences of dealing with the cases of survivors of sexual violence under the criminal law. And she also told us the historical genesis of the Indian Evidence Act and the kind of changes we had after Mathura rape case and after Nirbhaya tragedy. And also currently the debates that are going on sexual violence and sexual harassment at workplace. After that, we had a third presentation on the gender dimension of natural resource management, and which Dr. Vishal Narain, he discussed the question of collection of fuel, fodder, water, animal care, kitchen gardening, forest-based economies, and the role of women, contribution of women, invisibilization and non-recognition of women, and not having decision-making power. How does it impact not only women themselves, but also the households and the economies? And he also focused especially on the political economy of water and the women's, and also all three presenters, they also brought in the intersectional vulnerabilities of women, and also the gender-based intersectional vulnerabilities and need for going beyond gender binary. Yesterday's presentations were also about the Dr. Advocate Albertina, who has played a pivotal role in the act and the campaign against sexual harassment at workplace right from the 80s. And she was the first person to conceptualize the definition of show the limitation of section 356 and 508, anti-teasing and outraging the modesty of women, as against that, bringing the whole term called sexual harassment at workplace. She also gave many examples and also told the procedural aspects of how to institute ICC, what is the jurisdiction of ICC and Internal Complaints Committee and the local complaints committee. And she also discussed the limitations of the current ICC and the structure that we have in the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. After that, Dr. Amar Jisani's presentation was on the abortion, the whole debate, ethics of abortion. We know that currently there is a heated debate going globally, especially after United States of America. They also gave liberty to all the states to either ban abortion outrightly, or the way they interpret, different states have responded differently. And we know that currently also there are several countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and who are having variety of restrictions on abortion law, and how criminalization of abortion law, who pays the price of it? It's women who are, and this whole argument of pro-life, pro-choice, and moderate positions which are existing in different countries and its implications on women, unwanted pregnancies that women have, whatever, whether you criminalize law or not, women who have unwanted pregnancy, they resort to any method of abortion, and it also results into the hazards for women at the same time. So women face problems on their bodily injury, in terms of bodily injury. At the same time, state is also so insensitive to women's miseries. Then we had the third presentation was about the Domestic Violence Act and how it is implemented in the Indian courts, and also how it has escalated during the pregnancy, during the pandemic, and the data on NFHS and NCRB were deconstructed, and what kind of loopholes that we have in terms of having a law but not implemented by states after states, and the need for allocating funds, functions, and functionaries with regards to Domestic Violence Act. Now we are going to discuss a very important issue faced by the women's rights movement as well as human rights movement, which is about implementation of Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act, and many other aspects of women's rights and policy, national empowerment policy, which India adopted in 2001. And currently we have a draft women empowerment policy, revised version, and the updated version in 2016, but it has not translated into actually a policy. It is still at a level of draft. So I think, and also the last presentation will be about the laws regarding violence against women. And from the point of view of a government officer who has worked with the state. So we had both representatives from the state and the civil society, or you can say non-state professionals who have been the resource persons, and participation has been very active throughout this 2 days. And I think today is going to be equally interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Patel, for opening the sessions. Now, we will start with the first session of our training program. Our first distinguished expert for this session is Professor Vijayalakshmi Nanda. Professor Nanda is Principal and Professor of Political Science, Miranda House College, University of Delhi. We welcome you, ma'am, and please go ahead with the session.
Thank you, Professor Patel, and thank you, Dr. Arjun Kumar and Dr. Khimire. I would be focusing mainly on looking at the declining child sex ratio in India. We are all very happy with the latest NFHS 5 round that has come, which has shown some improvements, marginal improvements in the incidences of domestic violence, better institutional delivery, turnarounds in infant mortality, total fertility rates having come down. But again and again, we come back to the most crucial issue that ails India, and that is the daughter aversion that we have in this country. And I believe that it is a matter of gender discrimination. And this is what the women's movement and even the fact that the Honorable Prime Minister, Prime Minister Modi ji, has also spoken about it right from his speech from the Red Fort, that the emphasis should be on examining the discrimination against the girl child. And his flagship program, the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao campaign, is also centered around this. Having said that, if you take a look at the NFHS, and I would like all of you to look at it, you will see that there is improvement in the use of family planning methods. Most states have reduced their fertility rates. But is it something that we are still missing as to why is it that families are choosing, while they are choosing smaller families, they are still choosing to have at least one son or most one son? What is it that we need to look at? When it comes to sex ratio at birth, in the last 5 years, it is still below 950 for 7 of the largely of the states. Sex ratio at birth, which is the number of females per 1,000, males, that is how it is looked at. The ratio has declined in 7 more states. And notable declines this time is Goa, 966 to 838. Kerala, also there is a decrease. 1047 to 951. Tripura has, of course, a sex ratio at birth which is above 1,000. Of course, the 0 to 6 age group sex ratio that the census looks at is more than just SRB. It is looking at a long term, little more. So 0 to 6 age group they are looking at. So, however, this also shows us that this is a problem that continues to be there in India, and it continues to ail us. And how has the women's movement looked at it? Now, if you take a look at it, and Professor Patel is very much here being part of the movement herself at that stage, from the 1980s onwards, I think 1970s onwards, the women's movement has been involved with this issue. And they have looked at it in a two-pronged manner. One is that they were very, very clear on one fact, that they would not be overlapping over the right to abortion. So now, compared to India, like you said, and Dr. Jesani's presentation was on that, I need not elaborate on it. We do know that we have a very progressive legislation when it comes to Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971. And even if people may say that some of it is largely to do with population control, and it is about, about controlling women's reproduction, it continues to be far more progressive than other countries in the world. And we should be thankful that the women's movement has made a separate law for looking at sex ratio at birth, because the reason why we are looking at less girls than boys in the population, right from the time when Amartya Sen wrote, about 100 million missing women, he was not only talking about the girl child issue in India, he was talking about largely all of South Asia. However, when we take a look at it, even today, irrespective of the large number of programs that the government has brought in, so we have to now look closely at what is not being implemented and what requires attention. Right at the outset, I am saying that the women's movement very carefully kind of looked at a law which was going to be separate from abortion. And that is why they did it, because they did not want to wanted to overlap over the right to women's rights. And it started looking at it from the use of new reproductive technologies and how that should not be misused. So, Professor Patel's own work and the organization Sehat's work around this, bringing in a citizens movement, the Forum Against Sex Determination and Sex Pre-Selection, a whole movement of citizens, not just women, in Maharashtra, led to a certain understanding on this issue. While in Mumbai that was happening, in Delhi, the Center for Women's Development Studies, with Veena Mazumdar in the chair, thought of also engaging with this issue. While they were engaging with this issue in the 0 to 6 age group, there was largely a fall. There was a use of this, misuse of this technology, a reproductive technology, which had come in to find out congenital abnormalities. Whether a fetus is a male or female was not the reason. The reason was to find out whether there are any abnormalities in the fetus, which requires intervention, medical or otherwise, to make it better. That was the reason. That was being used in order to find out whether it is female. And this led to the first law, which was the PNDT Act, 1994, implemented in 1996, the Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques, Regulation and Prevention of Misuse of these technologies. And that continued. But after 1996, even when it was implemented, one did not see much movement on the ground. And the women's movement continued to be involved with it, trying to see that this law is implemented. This law basically is about misuse, not the use, but the misuse of reproductive technologies. It started with looking at chorionic villus biopsy. It looked at ultrasound, which is the latest, more sanitized crime, is what Professor Agnihotri called it. So even looking at engaging with this, that what is this? So this determination, sex determination, became a crime. And it was not actually abortion, which was the crime at that point of time. And even today, it is sex determination, or the misuse of technologies to determine sex and communicate it, that became the crime. So I think the women's movement's methods of keeping this particular issue separate is something to be lauded. Because I do not think in this nuanced way, anywhere in the world, women's movements have worked. And somewhere we do not understand the kind of negotiations women's movements have made with the states and how they have looked at it, not just in a conflictual way, but also in a collaborative way, also in a way in which one would call it, cooperative. So it was not just that they were confronting the state or they were conflicting with it, they were looking at it from a collaborative and cooperative sense. And the state also became a part of this mission to save the girl child, if one can call it that. And this particular mission continued for a long time. And from 1990s onwards, one did see a movement on the ground, so to say, to engage with this issue. However, in 2001, when the census results came in, one did see a huge kind of a decline. And that decline was no longer confined to the urban, northern, prosperous states, which was seen to be patriarchal, but it had spread all over India. And that particular, sex ratio led us to start thinking as to what is it that we are missing. The implementation of the PNDT Act was still very much a part of the discussion. But what came in at that point of time was a pre-conceptual, new reproductive technology, which had come into the market. First advertised by an American giant called GenSelect, and GenSelect was advertising it, supposedly meant to, you can choose the sex of your fetus, leading to a certain kind of an understanding of eugenics coming from the US. So you saw the nexus between global capitalism and the nexus of global capitalism with a certain kind of patriarchy that they had noted in the South Asian region. This resulted in women's movements, again, raising this issue, working with the state, moving from door to door, and then bringing in what comes to be known today as the preconception prenatal diagnostic technique, prohibition of sex selection. This, I think, 2003-04 is when the act comes into existence, or maybe a little later. I'm forgetting the time, but perhaps that is the time when the PCPNDT Act comes into existence. And during this time, we now have a range when it comes to the law. So the range is that you are not only covering prenatal diagnostic techniques, which is just the determination of sex, but also looking at preventing and seeing it as a crime that you're bringing about a sex selection, which is even before the conception. So pre-conception stage, any kind of technology used to determine and bring about a male fetus or a female fetus for that matter was not allowed. And this is the law that Government of India goes by and we believe in. And this law has not really been implemented in the true sense of the spirit as we would have wanted it to. And this is where the problem that continues to ail us. So the Government of India has been working in two ways on it. First, they have looked at the demand side. And when it comes to the demand side, it is coming from families. So therein, they look at various empowerment or incentivized kind of, programs. So you have had Ladli schemes, you have had, Balri Rakshak Yojana, Balri Samriddhi, and so many Lakshmi Ladli, so many kinds of schemes that were, there, which was incentivizing, providing a certain amount of financial incentive to families so that they would not see their daughters as liabilities. Other than that, there was, of course, the PNDT Act, which I told you about. However, the women's movement again kept working on this to say that, you cannot see this in a compartmentalized way. You have to look at it closely from what is called a holistic way. And in that holistic way, there was this emphasis that it should be not just the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, but the Ministry of Women and Child Development, the Ministry of Home Affairs, all of them coming together. And the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign is actually a very holistic, very comprehensive campaign, which engages with both these issues. You have the PNDT Act, which is the PCPNDT Act, which is largely a part of the Beti Bachao. And the Beti Bachao, or protecting of daughters, actually is around that. It is the implementation of the PCPNDT Act. And the Beti Padhao is mostly girl child education, which is good focus on. So when it comes to Beti Padhao, we are really seeing a huge, improvement in terms of education of the girl child, families having moved to, engaging with this notion of educating their daughters, and especially when it comes to school education, even to some extent to higher education, but largely school education, we see an improvement. And we also see small families. So the focus on education, especially for the girl child, has increased. And this may have to do with the amount of work and the kind of campaigns that have, been unfurled. So when you look at the 2011 census, for example, I spoke about the 2011 census also, there is a decline. So it is only the 2021 census which would have shown us some kind of a picture. But studies coming from Niti Aayog, studies coming from the field show us disparate pictures. I mean, there are some studies which are showing us and revealing that there have been improvements. And we did see that improvement in 2001 to 11 in Punjab and Haryana. Even if they continue to be one of the worst, there was an improvement of 100 points. And one said that is because there was a lot of focus on implementing the law there. Now, when you go to Haryana, and since I was doing a study with ICSSR support and looked at child sex ratio in those regions, one did notice that there is improvement when it comes to the girl child, when it comes to education. But the very notion of seeing the girl child as a liability continues. And that has to do with marriage. And therefore, this significant indicator of women's status as marriage, that is something that we need to, kind of engage with. The other area is employability or employment, and that is another focus that needs to be looked at. However, having said that, I think it is important for us to engage with the notion of, declining child sex ratio from an idea which clearly examines what is the gender discrimination that one is looking at. I am definitely trying to engage at it from a point of view of discrimination rather than violence, because I think the whole idea of violence again brings in this overlap over women's rights. It is discrimination that one is engaging with, a discrimination which the state has made very clear is illegal. And it is a discrimination which the women's movement has made very clear. They are very much a part of the solution. They are looking at ways to end this discrimination. But it continues, and it continues in upper middle class homes. So what is the question that we need to ask ourselves at this stage? What is it about the modernizing small family norm? While we have understood that we need to have small families and our fertility rates, the TFRs are showing us good improvement. What is it that is still not making us choose on a premise of gender equality? And this is what the women's movement, as well as, I would say, even bureaucrats and other bodies which have been part of the state machinery, they have been questioning and looking very closely at. I have been part of various task forces, even of the women and child development. They would have the secretary meetings, and they would also be engaging, looking at every district, trying to find out what is it that we are still missing. While education is being so, one of the other blocks that needs to be looked at while you're looking at the demand side is the supply side. So are we going to engage now with medical ethics? Is that something that we need to very clearly? And I know Dr. Jesani's large, great work on this issue of medical ethics. He has been raising it time and again. Is that a box that we need to open and need to look at closely? How do we get this into the medical education? How do we engage with doctors? How do we engage with alternative medical practitioners to the extent that they become open to the idea of engaging or being sensitive to gender equality? Because this is a very area which requires proactive, engagement. And I do know UNFPA and others have tried to make doctors as ambassadors for daughters. But other than doctors, there are also alternative medical practitioners. There are other kinds of engagements on this issue that needs to be looked at. The other box that one has not opened on the supply side is the capitalist market, which has made a fast buck of it. So if you take a look, like for example, my work has also been in Orissa. Now, Odisha has never been marked for being intensely patriarchal. It has never been marked for being a son preference society. However, when you look at the sex ratio, it has been declining, the child sex ratio. While studying Odisha very, very closely, one noted that it is like, the supply was propelling the demand. So there were middlemen who were involved in this process of providing sex determination technologies right at people's doorsteps. So when this was being delivered, the families were able to determine the sex of the fetus, and abortion would then become an indigenous matter. And how it happened, where it happened, there the doctors were not even involved. So how does one then check this? What is that particular part of the supply that one needs to look clearly at? What are the kind of criminal activities that are happening in that field? So therein, very the kind of technologies that have evolved, especially coming from China and other parts, they have been smuggled illegally into the country. And how are they being used? They're small machines being used to determine sex of the fetus. How are we going to control that? So that is another trait that one needs to look at. The burgeoning capitalist, neo-capitalist market, which allows this to continue. So how do you look closely at that? How do you also engage with any kind of policy or program which may be, which is trying to implement the law, but is still not able to do so due to certain kinds of, invisible activities, which one is not able to see? This could be one. How is that? So we need to engage very closely with that. So the women's movement has been working very hard on this issue. If you look at 1980s, the autonomous women's movement, which looked at violence against women, you looked at campaigns against sati. That was the first Roop Kanwar's case. That was a very good movement that happened, and it did engage with various issues around against child marriage, against domestic violence, which led to the law, and against sex selection or sex selective abortion, or which is what they have worked on, which led to this particular law. However, substantive convictions, getting people into, kind of engaging with them from that point of view, as looking at it from the perspective of crime against women, that has been difficult, because here the victim is not very clear. Like, you are not able to understand who the victim is, because the parents are involved in this process. They are part of that process. The doctors or the medical practitioners who are part of this business, they are part of the process. So there is no picture of a victim that delivers. So how do you engage with that? It's very, very important that we understand that this is a crime which requires a multiple stakeholder kind of engagement. One of the engagement could be with young people who are to be parents. And if they could be engaged and the idea of gender equality could be spoken to them, to be told to them, that could be one. The other would be to look at empowering policies for women, and not just empowering policies around reproduction, but empowering policies which looks at their property rights, looks at asset ownership, looks at employability, looks at employment, self-reliance. Those are the things we need to look at. Then again, engaging with men and boys for clarity, so that there is no pressure on a woman, or she's not coerced into wanting to have sons, or pushed into sex determination facilities without her knowledge, if that could be done. And I want to pay here a great respect to a young woman who had fought a very, very long battle against this, and who unfortunately lost her life. Her daughters are alive. Her name was Mitu. She's well known. And I pay my respects to her, because she brought this to the public eye, and she did fight. I wouldn't call it a losing battle, because she was able to bring this to everybody's notice. She has her twin daughters are grown up now. They are, leading good lives with their grandparents. So she was able to bring it to the forefront that educated families with all progressive thoughts still continue to have this kind of son preference, where they do not believe that sex determination or sex selective abortion is a crime. They do not really see it as a crime. So how do you engage with this as crime or as gender discrimination? The women's movement has walked its path on this. I would also like to say that the government also has walked its path on it, because we only come to know about declining child sex ratio because the census does a very good study of it. The Niti Aayog also presented a number of studies trying to show how this declining sex ratio continues. We also have the NFHS presenting the data. These are all government data. The government itself, it cannot get better than this. The national flagship programs of the government are talking about Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. But the fact is, the government does not give birth, the state does not give birth to daughters, families do. And it is here that the onus or the responsibility will have to lie. And somewhere, changing mindsets or changing attitudes. One is, of course, the implementation of the law, very, very important. The PCPNDT Act, which is a very comprehensive legislation, looking at sex selection, looking at prenatal diagnostic techniques, allowing its use for saving human lives, but emphasizing on medical ethics, and yet stringent punishments for those who are misusing it. All of that is very clearly there. The law is very much there, and it can be read by any one of you. The government also has done its bit, brought in a tri-ministerial setup. It is by itself a very, very ideal policy. And the women's movement have also looked at it very closely, engaged with the politics of language. I remember in the 1980s, and Professor Patel may remember, it used to be called Campaign Against Female Feticide. But the moment they were made alert to this idea that this may also overlap over the right to abortion, immediately a politically correct language was brought in, that we would say sex selection, sex selective abortion, gender biased sex selection. UNFP also worked very hard on this issue, the United Nations Fund for Population Association. So there was a lot of activities around this, and a number of studies, including Professor Patel's, Mary John, Tulsi Patel, Ravinder Kaur, many of them have worked on it. Now I will end my talk by looking at the consequences. How are we facing the consequences? Now, lately, I know many of you are aware of the fact that the large consequences, of course, there are no girls in that particular society. So we have looked at certain parts of Haryana and Punjab in this study that we did, Nupur Roy and me, that we looked at it very, very closely. And we saw that this declining child sex ratio has led to very less women in those particular villages, and of course there is again another burden on women, which means that certain women are trafficked for marriages, they are trafficked for or they are even married, but they are moved away from their natal homes, and there is a pressure on them, the violence on them is greater. Whereas some of them, it may not be as cruel as one would think. It is a marriage and they are being provided some support, but they do not have that many rights within that particular home, because they are coming from Jharkhand, from Kerala, from other parts. Some of them are able to assert their rights, they're able to change that home set, but some of them are also suffering. So how does one engage with that? Not that one is saying that marriages should only be within one particular state, but the very basis of such marriages that leads to greater violence against women. And that needs to be looked at. I would also like to say that certain Khap Panchayats, although Khap Panchayats are generally seen as patriarchal, have also worked very closely on this issue. They have worked hard on this issue, and they are also trying to change mindsets. So there are different bodies which have come in, but the best way to work on it, as far as my understanding goes, is that educational institutions get involved and they bring in gender equality at that level. There's a lot of celebration of the girl child also that is happening. But if educational institutions bring in gender equality as a norm, especially medical and law universities should be participating in this process and seeing to it that it is a large part. The national education policy allows internships, allows entrepreneurship. So a large part of this internship should be to focus on this particular issue. Let all of them come out as ambassadors of daughters, and medical colleges and law colleges should emphasize on it. There, if those young people who are idealistic are able to come forward as people who are ambassadors to daughters, it will be a huge improvement, because they will be making the next decisions, family fertility decisions, which will impact the whole population of India. So that would be one. The other would be, of course, that civil society bodies go with this view of the women's movement, that they have to work very closely, and they seem to forget, because somewhere the victim is not visible. So one does not see it as a major kind of an issue. And the government has put all its understanding around it. But I would like to end with hope, because we do see improvements. We do see improvements in certain, and that is the paradox, that in the same area, there would be families which have chosen to have only one daughter or two daughters, and they're very happy about it. They're celebrating their daughters, and many of them are influenced by the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao campaign. And we were very pleasantly surprised to see how many of them were taken by that idea and they wanted to promote it. So there were families which were doing that. But then again, that idea or that message had not reached every family. And that is what we need to do. We need to take it to every family, to every stakeholder who's involved in this process. Right now, there is a supportive, the legislation is supportive, the policies and programs are supportive. And of course, there is that overarching national policy that Professor Patel was talking about. We hope it will come to fruition. And if it does, this should be the focus. In India, there are two issues which require focus. One is declining child sex ratio, and other is employment of women. And they are both part of the same story. So I think when it comes to even dowry, or it comes to domestic violence, I think self-reliance, or at least respecting women's choices when it comes to, or respecting and recognizing that their labor, even at home, is something that needs to be recognized as contributing to the national economy. If we can do that, I think that would be very important to be part of this conversation. But the PCPNDT Act is again a comprehensive legislation, and the Beti Bachao part, which keeps, that is basically the fabric that needs to be looked at. So again, I would like to go with the 3 A's that the UNFPA talked about, which the government of India also promoted all the time. Number one, to look at asset ownership for girls and women. Number two, to look at agency for women so that they are able to take decisions, make decisions, and be empowered to take empowered and informed decisions. Not just decisions, but these decisions should be taken with responsibility. The third part is to create old age security. South Korea was able to turn around based on this, that there was old age security for senior citizens, thereby not making them dependent on their children. And that relationship between parents and children is one of mutual love and reciprocity, and not necessarily one of a burden and an obligation as it is. And thereby that could be one way. I've tried to say whatever I could, and I hope I have not gone over my time. I was told 40 minutes, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you, Professor Patel and Dr. Kumar, for this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Professor Nanda, for this enlightening presentation. Now, before moving on to the Q&A session, I would like to invite Professor Patel with some remarks.
Yeah. So both Professor Dr. Vijaya Lakshmi Nanda and myself, we are sailing in the same boat. We have been part of the campaign for past 3 decades. Only some points I want to add is one, that even we have to teach other countries also, because there are 80 countries in the world where sex ratio is adverse. And the reasons are more or less same: son preference, daughter aversion, and now that science is in service of the medical malpractice. So it is happening in a big way. You also have a self-help kit. You don't need doctor. You can identify the sex of fetus by using that kit, which are being given, and you don't even know from where it is coming. No. So only, as you rightly said, that laws and criminal justice system or surveillance system, monitoring system, it has its own limitation, because a most important thing is changing the mindset. So telling people that eliminate inequality, not women, destroy dowry, not daughters, and sex determination in our context is a female extermination, which the global institutions, because those who are in a for right to abortion campaign, they don't even see this under the sex selective abortion. They see it as a question of choice, that if women don't like their daughters, then they should be given a choice, because even after she's born, she's going to be treated miserably. But I think this is a very fatalistic logic. We can't accept that, and we can't use the existing systems and structures for a very, very systematic elimination. The kind of damage which sex selective abortions with the abuse of advanced technology has taken place has been more than what 5,000 years of patriarchy had done. No, because in 50 years you can see such a big change. And I think you have given a very good example of Korea, that how through state intervention, mainly about stringent and the strict judicious implementation of law, working very closely with the FOXY and the medical organization doctors, that if they did resort to this kind of practices, there would be penalty. It won't be, there is no impunity about it. And I think that message was very clearly told by the Korean state, and also old age security. I think that even Dr. Govind Kelkar's study of China also shows that the moment China adopted neoliberal policy, where the welfare measures were curtailed, even in China, Chinese parents started seeing their children only as a old age security. And that's why the one child norm became, when one child norm was imposed, then they chose only son, because there are 4 elderly people to be looked after by a young couple, because and the patriarchal bias and localities that it is only the groom's family who would benefit from the services of the couple, not the bride's family. So that is one very important thing. Currently, if we see NCRB data, 50%, there has been 45% increase in dowry deaths. If you see this week's data, and there is no campaign. Earlier, we used to have an anti-dowry campaign. Now it is not there. So it is not that we have been able to tackle this issue. It is very much an issue. And even the states which were earlier known to be progressive, there also dowry has become a very, very menace. I'm talking about Kerala. So I think that we need to. Your point about use of folklore, folktale, and the people, the scriptures is also very important. Talking about Bhaskaracharya and the Lilavati, how Bhaskaracharya imparted knowledge to his only daughter Lilavati. So this kind of empowering images and the icons, if we can get from the scripture, and even the local stories, no, they would be very important. In schools and colleges and parent teachers association, these issues need to be discussed, because in Bombay we did that. Even in the high school, like 8th, 9th, and 10th standard students, we got massive response. So I think awareness of girls important, but within the family setup, they are powerless. So it is very important for parents education about this, and also community-based organizations, civil society organizations, they also need to take up this issue. So Beti Bachao in isolation is not going to work, but we also need to tell them the implications of demography. And you rightly said that we have been able to reduce the birth rate, like TFR has gone down, but who has paid the price of TFR? It is our daughters. It's the girl child of India which has paid the price of it. But at least in India, we have such a robust movement which is challenging the patriarchal mindset, leading to femicide. But in other countries, we don't even have this kind of movement, and still it is happening. Yeah. Very good, brilliant presentation. You are so erudite, lucid, simple, and give so many examples. And Mithu Khuranas, yes, salute to her personal struggle. And I think there are many such Mithu Khuranas who are not, who are in their personal life now asserting, because one of the reasons for domestic violence, if you see even in NFH's report, the pregnant mother refusing to undergo sex selectivity. So there is a section of educated women who are putting a fight within the domestic arena that they would not abort female fetus. So that these are some of the stories that.
Ma'am, we have questions from participants. We start with Binita ji. Binita Behra ji. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm just trying to unmute. One second.
Okay. Meanwhile, Neena ji, you can unmute and speak.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the brilliant exposition and also the interventions by Professor Vibhuti. I just want to, my thoughts are going to how can we take the religious leaders on board? And so a lot of the son preference is scripturally inscribed, and this goes deep into the consciousness and it goes into the subconscious mind of the religious followers. And even in Mahabharata, we can see the son preference, the frantic attempt to get sons so that they can inherit the throne. And also in Kerala, the pro-life movement is getting traction. I am a member of Indian Christian Women's Movement. We are doing a lot, but do you have some suggestions how to engage with the religious leaders and some success stories from abroad? Thank you so much.
Should I answer each question, or I'll take a set of questions? I can answer this question, yes.
Okay.
I thank you for that question. You know, religious leaders were involved with this campaign once. Professor Patel may remember. There was a huge involvement of religious leaders at one time. The Akal Takht in Punjab was involved to a large extent. And they had started a Puri Mar decree also. And I think even for that matter, the Art of Living program also got associated with UNFPA. There have been various, and I agree that anyone who has a voice in the community can amplify it for the girl child. Like I said, even the Khap Panchayat took a pro-girl position and they also played a role. So anyone, I think right now we are open and we should bring in religious leaders, we should speak to them, and this dialogue should continue. Whereas there are some things in the scripture which get amplified, but there are certain scripts in the scripture which also celebrate the girl child, which speak about, good things. This can also be brought to the light. And coming from East India, I mean, I know, for example, there are many writings, Balram Das's Lakshmi Purana, which brings in about the status of the woman and the girl child, which is celebrated. So how, there are kings and there are stories of gods having only daughters. So I think it is a way in which it can be presented, and stories from mythologies anything that influences mindsets, and if it is done with an idea of gender sensitivity, it should be welcomed. And but having said that, I think it has to be done very sensitively. It has to be done with great conscious, with the person who is training them. I would also like to remember Kamla Bhashin, because she was a great gender, trainer. She could train people to speak on various issues, and she always used to say, I'm open to everyone. I can speak to anyone on this. So we need trainers. Professor Patel is also a good trainer, but you need to know who is the person who will discuss with these religious groups, with all the religious groups, who will bring them to a consensual viewpoint on women and girls. That is very important. And I think from my side, I feel it is important that everybody engages, and I'm sure all religious texts have beautiful things to say about women and the girl child, which can be amplified, which can be talked about. And if it influences mindsets, it should. But having seen how the Akal Takht had taken out the Kodimar decree, but it did not influence mindsets so much as we would have expected it to. So one needs to see very clearly and closely that when it comes to fertility choices, what is it that families, because these are decisions taken in private, so what is it that they will be influenced by? So I think when it comes to religious groups, that conversation also has to be very carefully and very sensitively put forward. How will they speak? What are the issues that they will speak on? How will they amplify this particular gender sensitive issue? It's important. And it has to come through a community understanding. Not all of us have that understanding. So I would say it has to be very, very carefully negotiated. But personally, I am all for anyone who speaks for the girl child. So I would like to say that. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Megha ji. Meghapuri.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. This was very, very enlightening, very helpful. I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what are the behavioral change campaigns, especially for the girl child, that you think have resulted in maximum impact? And what are the gap areas and what more can be done? Thank you.
So when it comes to the women's movement, I agree with Professor Patel that while certain groups, and especially global women's groups, have seen our campaign for the girl child as one against abortion rights, they have not understood that it is anti-women. What we are protesting about is not, it's not a divide between pro-choice. It is about everything is anti-women. So this is the fight, and the women's movements fights have, and the battle, the movement, especially the campaign against sex selective abortion, has been very, very strong. It has been good. Sehat's movement, I think, has been a very good one. They have really taken this movement very well. This is a great campaign that worked. And when it comes to the girl in the CWDS and its movements also delivered on the ground. Action India has done a number of campaigns which have delivered on the ground. Action Aid also had done a number of campaigns. When it comes to the government, I personally feel that the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao seems to have a certain traction when it comes to the people in the villages and urban, even in the middle urban areas. So it is a campaign which has helped. But while it helps with the girl child education, the PNDT, the PC-PNDT Act implementation is not through families. So that has to be stringently applied. How do we work on that part? And therein, like, Professor Patel is telling you, it is no longer a doctor. It is like I said, these are, invisible crimes. They are happening, door-to-door deliveries are happening. How do you bring about an understanding of it as criminal justice? That is where that campaign has to be. So that is why I was thinking maybe law students could be involved, doctors could be involved. That could be one way of amplifying this voice, that this particular decision that a family is taking in its privacy, it is a decision that is impacting the whole country, and we can play a role here and we can contribute to. And I personally support also dowry. I think the anti-dowry missions have helped, but now we don't hear much about them. I don't think now this is a discussion. The huge spending on weddings, the kind of capitalist propaganda that is around marriage and its spending around it, we have not spoken. We don't see it as criminal. We see it as self-love. We see it as celebration. it is actually very painful that we seem to be missing that point. And in fact, that is one area where women's groups will need to give importance to. And I would say, yes, I think these are the campaigns which have worked. I think the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao is a great campaign, and it requires support, especially around the Beti Bachao part, which can be enhanced.
Thank you, ma'am. We will take quite a few questions now. Okay, Binita ji, please go ahead. Binita ji, we can hear you. Some problem? Jagriti ji, Jagriti. Yeah.
Yes, hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Right. First of all, thank you very much, Professor Nanda. It was a very, very informative presentation and a lot of, cases that you discussed. And thank you, Dr. Patel and Dr. Arjun Kumar for organizing this course. It's really useful. So my question to Professor Nanda is that in the last part of your presentation, you said that the declining sex ratio is also, linked with the low economic participation of women. Right. So I want to know your some elaborated views on it, because I also see that unless and until we women are economically independent, their agency will not improve. And even if and they will not be able to make their own decision on yes, even if it's a girl, she wants to keep that girl. But on the other hand, if she's economically independent, she can make her decisions to some extent.
Right.
So could you please elaborate on that?
Yes. One is, of course, the fact is that they should be economically empowered, because I think that's an area that we need to look at, but also that her work is recognized. It is not just about, because you do see a lot of urban, prosperous, middle-class households where women are working, but they're under pressure to bear sons, because that is an indicator of their status. So how can we even, the self-esteem issues, they have to be looked at. What is that self-esteem issue that needs? So it is not just about employment and earning, but about recognizing her as somebody who's contributing to the household, as somebody who is, even if she's even working at home, recognizing that household work as work, recognizing doesn't have to always be about money or about income, but how can you really engage with it from the idea of equal respect? And we have not worked on that. Whereas if you take a look at the sex rate, even if you take a look at society, in fact, the whole declining child sex ratio, in the beginning, even the rural households had more daughters than the urban household. So what is it that is missing there? We need to look at it closely. So yes, self-reliance and a recognition of that. I agree, employability is one of the areas we need to work on, bring about greater self-reliance. But while we are doing that, which South Korea did, it's also about respecting women's work. Respecting women's work. The same work done by a woman is not, it has to be respected, and that has to come from civil society, it has to come from families. It is there that the respect has to be there. In fact, if you take a look at our constitution and our equal, pay for equal work, all of that, we are way better than most countries. Our maternity benefits, much better than most countries. The kind of maternity leaves we get, much better. It's kind of surprising the kind of support, childcare leave that we get, especially in government services. But are the corporate sectors doing that? Is it going to be possible in the unorganized sector? Sexual harassment at workplace, should it be also engaged with in these areas? I think equal respect, that's also important. Housework, to be recognized as contributing. These are the areas I think we need to look at, and we need to engage. I mean, I don't really claim to have all the answers, but I think these are some of the missing links that we have not put together.
Vinita ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, finally. Can I be unmuted?
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you, Vinita.
Yes, finally. Thank you, Dee. It's wonderful to listen to you. And just wanted to reiterate this aspect, because this is something I've been thinking of ever since we were part of the movement. Like, one thing is the connect between the different issues of women. The fact that the sex selective abortion, it has a critical connect with dowry, and which is also connected with domestic violence. So in the campaign, do you think we should have a more broad-based kind of, addressing this issue?
Yes.
And yeah, so and the fact is that we know that the present generation, the millennials as they are called, they feed on Insta and all those things. So surely the movement should also be geared up towards something different to reach out to these people. I mean, this is I would just like to ask you, because you are the one
Yeah.
at the end of.
Yes. I'm sorry, I may have missed some bits from your, because your voice was not coming very clearly, but I agree with you that it has to be a holistic campaign. What has been a big loss for us, and Professor Patel will agree, is the disagreement between women's groups when it comes to, taking this battle forward. And that has been to do with the overlap over the right to abortion. It has to do with the politics of funding. And that needs to be really engaged with, because I think the women's groups have generally, after 2000s, they have started coming back. 2011, 12, 13. But after that, there has not been much. The people have been uncomfortable because they have felt there is an overlap. There is generally a kind of a louder voice for safe access to abortion and on other things than on the issue of the girl child. Thereby, that is why I'm mentioning so many times Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, because really the women's movement in this case has taken a step back, and that is why this holistic understanding with Professor Patel is also pointing out to the anti-dowry movement, and which even Binita is talking about, and she has herself worked very closely on this issue. How can we bring about a more holistic understanding? Very important, and we would like to flag it off from here as to why it is important to link it. And also, when you have an overarching national policy, this should be the holistic viewpoint. That is why it is the women's movement which had encouraged the governments to think of it from a point of view of having multi-pronged approach. That is how three ministries came together, 4 ministries came together to fight on this issue. But I agree that the women's movement will need to have to come together once on this issue, because this continues to ail us. And we cannot be taking a backseat. And I agree that there is definitely a critical link between dowry, spending on marriages, between domestic violence, which has, by the state of it, come down marginally, but definitely something to celebrate that it has come down. Much more reporting takes place. And we should also celebrate these small measures that have come, which are coming through the NFHS lately.
Right. Ahana Chaudhary ji, kindly be brief. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, Ahana. You are audible.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an intriguing deliberation. So I have a comment followed by a question. Hailing from Assam, recently we have seen many cases where there has been a commodification of women's bodies as per se. Lot of women are being transferred to states like Haryana and to get married to their sons, and since there has been a low sex ratio since decades. So, and we see that there has been scarce work from the part of the state on this area, like the commodification and transference of women, especially from poor families in northeastern India to that of other states in North India. So, ma'am, what would be your take on it?
Yes, I pointed out the study we recently did with the ICSR support did show us that there were women. I'm not saying all of them were trafficked. They were marriages. They were proper marriages that took place. So this whole idea that this is all trafficking, it was not trafficking, but the fact is those girls were married off by their families. It was, whether you call it whatever ways you want to call it, they were not trafficked, but they had less say. They could not participate. They did not know the language. They could not get adjusted with the food, and they had less, their negotiating powers were very little. So if you look at the measurement of violence, they would have greater violence against them. I agree with you that those are very unequal marriages. And when we speak for equal marriages, we should. So in Assam, and that is why, a daughter is terminated or whatever, she's lost, and another daughter has to bear the burden of it. That is the cycle of it. So we need to work on both sides. So Assam and other states like Odisha, Jharkhand, where largely these women are being married to men in Haryana and other parts. While we encourage, we would like to see regional diversity and marriages like that, but they should be equal marriages, and that goes for everyone. So how can we work on that? And that could be another area where women's movements can work. And here, Professor Patel, there is no overlap. There is no overlap, and we can work on it. So this is an area that can be looked at very closely. However, not all these marriages are unequal, and I would like to say there are studies by Ravinder Kaur and others which show that women who have been married from Kerala and married to a man in Haryana, they are able to change their homes, and they are introducing their own kind of food. They are able to assert themselves. So there are those stories also, stories of hope, stories of changes. So I think we need to work on self-esteem building. We need to work on empowering girls and women, and we need to engage with the idea of equal marriages. So we need to engage with men and boys also. So even if there is such a marriage, for whatever reasons there might be, because the declining sex ratios consequences, it won't be very easy for us to immediately stop that, especially when it comes to marriage. We need to look at how these marriages, whatever marriages take place, how can they be made more equal? So maybe that's an area we need to, I mean, I am opening up certain boxes which have never been opened before. Right. And I'm looking at it from a non-confrontationist, more dialogic way. So is there a dialogue that can take place? Because dismissing all these marriages as trafficking and seeing all those women as victims is a problem, because are you then going to take them back? They are seeing those men as their husbands. They are married there. So how can both states work together in creating better equal marriages where, and if there is trafficking, it should be stopped, because that is a crime. But marriage is not a crime. So violence would be the crime. So how do you engage at it?
Bride bazaar should also be.
Yes, bride bazaar should stop. Yes, absolutely. I agree with you.
Right. So last question by Dr. Neelu Khosla ji.
Yeah. Good evening, ma'am. My due regards to everybody across the screen for such a session. Nanda ma'am, my question to you is, I've already got part of it answered in the northern part of India, but I would like to again bring it to your notice that despite education, whenever the marriage alliances between the North Indian and North Indian family, we have found out even among the educated class, the same norms of what you call that educated child has to rebel. It is being carried in foreign lands also now, because there they are organizing it in such that within the community. And ma'am, it is very painful. Like if a girl is an engineer or a doctor and they want that because of family ties or some type of family community feeling, what you call, should continue in a foreign land. We were earlier focusing that in South Asia, we would say that, but now it is being seen in people of Canada also, in England, and it is a large amount of divorce there. So our daughters are coming back. Our daughters are coming back. Sorry, I use this word because
they are so sad.
And only thing I would like to tell you that they are able to save their passport, they are able to keep their money with them, and they are able to communicate to their parents. And if the parents are only supporting their parents, they are coming back. Otherwise, it is not. The same is continuing, ma'am.
Yes. I did see some of that in Punjab. A large number of women having come back, and it is a painful, it's not just that the marriages break up, but it's almost like a extortion, because a lot of money is also taken away, and these girls and their parents, if they are not supportive, these girls have actually nowhere to go. And this is an area in which I again remember Manmohan Sharma from the Punjab Voluntary Health Association. He also passed away. I'm remembering some of these people while I'm speaking, because I want to pay my tribute to them. He had done a lot of work in those regions around this particular issue, how these girls were victimized in their marriages. And if they could not bear sons, they were thrown back and they were sent back home. So I met some of those women, and it was a story that, it was very difficult. And the government was trying. From Punjab, there were certain, the child welfare and also at the External Affairs Ministry. But then again, it is a private decision. So it is, how do you look at it? It is across the shores. Yes, this mentality, this patriarchal mentality is carried ashore also. So how do we work on this? We need to work on it by catching them young. So I think we need to work with the youth, and we need to have the women's movement also become a little more alert to this idea of violence, to the way how selective abortion is bringing about so many different kinds of crime. Otherwise, why would the Prime Minister pay so much attention to only this one issue and make it a flagship program? So that is why it's important for us to recognize that it is a matter of priority for gender, of gender within the government. So why should it not be one for for us, for in the women movements and as educationists? So I would like to rest here, and I again pay my tribute to Mitu, who passed away last, it's been almost 1.5 years, to Kamla Basheen and to Manmohanji, all of those who have actively worked in this field, and my tribute to all of you also who are here. I see Vibhuti ji also, we have learned from her. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nanda, for this really lively discussion.
1 minute. There are 12,000 cases with the Home Ministry currently of NRI brides who are facing very tremendous violence.
Yes.
So I think here the major question, how are we raising our daughters? These are the doctors and engineers and chartered accountants and MBA women whose parents have spent lakhs of rupees to get them married. Whole cost is borne by them. And still they are suffering. That means we have not taught them. Why you and me are fighting? Because we were taught that you should not put up with injustice and degradation. So I think here comes the role of socialization, and that's why we need to have workshop with the textbook writers also. That
I agree.
Doesn't have to be obedient and this thing. She also has to fight for her rights, and wherever there is injustice, she must raise her voice. No, so that also needs to be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Nanda, we have a lot of questions for you, but probably you can take 1 or 2 more questions from the Q&A box if you want.
Ma'am, you can type
answer them also there, right?
Yeah, you can type those answers if you have time.
Q&A.
You want me to answer it right now, or how do you want me to do this? Because this will
you can, I think most of it you have covered. So
I have covered most, and maybe I could email some answers, or we could, if that is a possibility, because I do have another meeting after this. So okay. So I will do that. But thank you for a patient hearing, and I see there's a lot of support for this issue. So this country is in safe hands. If that is how participants only can take this message home. Thank you, Professor Patel.
Even that ostentatious marriage point also you have taken up.
Yes.
And the last one is also, that you have taken up personally. What
Thank
kind
you,
of values we give?
Thank you, ma'am, for being with us. And now we will move ahead with the second session of our last day training program. Our next distinguished expert for this session is Ms. Urvashi Prasad. Ms. Prasad is Director, Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, DMEO, Niti Aayog. We welcome you, ma'am, to IMPRI and to this training course. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I just have a slight signal issue, so I've just kept my video off for now. I'll switch it on later.
Sure.
But I'll just make a start. So, I will actually be talking about the policy landscape as it pertains to gender. And in between, I'll also keep talking about the challenges that we have on the policy side. So in terms of policy, I think quite rightly it has been said that gender is very much a priority. In fact, even at the recent Independence Day speech, the Prime Minister emphasized that, for 2047 and for India to really become a developed country, gender is a very serious priority, and Nari Shakti, as he said, has to be a very important agenda for all of us. So I think at the highest levels, there is definitely that interest in and attention towards gender. What we need to do is actually translate it into effective policies And that is far more challenging in a country like ours, because when I say policies, it's not just policies at the national level, but more importantly, perhaps policies at the subnational level, because a lot of what happens in India actually depends on what happens in the states. Given that India is such a large country and you cannot run India from Delhi, a lot of policy making that happens in states actually impacts, what happens on the ground. So it's very important that we translate the bigger vision that we have and the bigger picture that we have into effective policies. So one bucket of policies that we have is related to women's labor force participation. And we have a number of schemes which are related to skill training of women, including, women who want to become entrepreneurs. So you'll see a lot of schemes that the government has which pertain to skill development for women, as well as women's entrepreneurship. And there's also subsidies and stipends which are available for women to actually set up small businesses, etc. So that is one whole area that we have in the policy space, which relates to the labor force participation. Now here, I'll talk of policy and also legislation. So I think, we had some discussion on the legislation that India has actually brought about a lot of effective legislation, whether it's the Maternity Benefit Act or other types of legislation. However, there is still a lot more that we need to do for women in the informal sector, because majority of women in India are employed in the informal sector. So when we are talking of policies and we are talking of legislations, there is a lot more that we have to do for women in the informal sector. And I think that is where our focus has to lie. In terms of the formal sector, we need to look at not just the creation of policies or the enactment of legislations, but we also need to look at their implementation. Because Maternity Benefit Act, while it is very well intentioned, in some cases there have been some unintended consequences. In some cases, you have companies saying that, we don't want to hire women because now we will have to, give mandatory leave to women for maternity. So there have been some unintended consequences of this Maternity Benefit Act as well. So it's very important to monitor its implementation. And it's very important for companies, for corporates, for others to implement it in letter and spirit. So instead of, seeing this as some sort of, negative perception and sort of deciding against hiring women or discriminating against women, they should see it as a positive policy instrument. So I think that is something which is very, very important for women in the formal sector. So I think, and then of course, when it comes to maternity, then we're also talking of paternity, and we're also talking of the whole concept of family leave. So I think a lot of this, the government has already brought in certain legislations, but beyond that, a lot of it also depends on the companies themselves. And a lot of it has to come from, them taking proactive measures on their own. Everything, it's very difficult for the government to mandate or, to force everyone to implement. So certain things have to come through self, mandating and self-regulation. And I think that is very, very important, that all sections of society, gender is something which I firmly believe that government policy can play an enabling role, but it cannot be effective in isolation. It needs the private sector, it needs civil society, it needs all other stakeholders to come together. So that's on the economic front. The second front is on education. There are a lot of policies which are focused on girls' education. And, you will find that there's a lot of scholarship schemes, which various state governments have also put in place to basically encourage girls to join school. So there's a lot of focus on that. But a lot of focus now in terms of education is on ensuring that girls actually complete their secondary education and then go on to do higher education. Because what is happening is that girls might get enrolled at the primary school level, but then we see a big dropout. As soon as the transition to secondary school happens, we see a big dropout. So the challenge for the policy level is how to ensure that girls remain in school and they remain at the secondary school level. So there are certain interventions which are designed for that, to ensure that parents actually spend money on their daughter's schooling instead of using it for their marriage or other purposes. So that is something which is a big area of focus in terms of education. And we're also looking at higher education. So there's also some initiatives to encourage women in STEM, for instance, science, technology, how to encourage more women to come into the science and technology space. That is also something which is now being done, and there's a lot of focus on that. The third major piece is on health. And there's a number of schemes on health and nutrition which are focused on girls and women. Some of them pertain to addressing anemia. And as we know that there's a lot of problem of anemia in adolescent girls, as well as pregnant women, women of the childbearing age. So there's a number of schemes, under Mission Poshan and various other schemes which look at nutrition, addressing anemia, and addressing other types of malnutrition in women. There are also various health schemes which pertain to women, but a lot of them are related to maternity. And I think that is the big shift we need to make in the policy space when it comes to health. Of course, you continue to have schemes which are related to adolescent girls, nutrition, and you continue to focus on pregnant women, but that cannot be the only focus. There are a number of other health issues which women are grappling with. And now more and more you see that women are grappling with non-communicable diseases. The incidence of breast cancer, cervical cancer, this is going up in our country. So it's very important that our health policies for women actually give due importance to other health issues, such as non-communicable diseases, mental health, and especially after the pandemic, mental health has disproportionately affected women. So it's very important that we stop looking at women only for childbearing purposes, but we actually start looking at women's health much more holistically. There are some steps towards it, but there's a lot more that we need to do. And we need to move towards this when it comes to policy. So that's what I would say on the health side. And then the sort of fourth major bucket that we have is related to women's safety and legal issues pertaining to women. So we see a lot of schemes, you would have heard of the one-stop centers and various other schemes which are designed to provide psychosocial support to victims of violence and abuse. But I think in this, again, while the government schemes need to be more effective, we also need to dedicate more funding. As you would be aware, we have a Nirbhaya fund, but we see that in many states, adequate money has not been allocated towards it. So it's very important that we actually allocate the right amount of money towards these schemes, and we also spend that money, we utilize that money, because often we see underutilization. So it's a very important role for the government when it comes to women's safety and security, but it cannot be the government's role alone. And you know, it has to be an entire societal effort, and this is where we really need civil society, we need the private sector, we need everyone in terms of how do we change mindsets. Because even if you see, you know, we all ask this question that why has India's labor force participation for women declined and continued to decline? And one of the reasons is the social attitudes towards women. You know, as the household income increases, and this was noted in the economic survey a couple of years ago, that as the household income increases, people sort of start to say that why does a woman need to work? She doesn't need to work anymore. So this is a societal attitude, it's a social mindset, and while the government, you know, certainly has to play a role in this, it has to be alongside all the other stakeholders. So I think women's safety and security, it has a huge relation to the mindset, and that is something which needs a societal effort, but the government certainly needs to put in place enabling policy and legislative measures and ensure that they are adequately funded and the funds are adequately utilized. And also there is training of the workforce, because for instance, if we look at police, you know, the police needs to be adequately trained in how to deal with women who have been victims of crime. And now when we talk of crime, we also have to talk of cyber crimes. So there needs to also be adequate capacity building within the government, adequate training, so that all these issues can be addressed. So I think I've covered the 4 major areas that I wanted to talk about in terms of economic participation, education, health, women's safety, nutrition. There's also some other policies which have an impact on women, policies related to housing, policies related to sanitation, to drinking water, to clean energy. So it's not just one ministry or one department, it's truly multi-sectoral. And so I think we need to look at it in that way. So I'll stop here and maybe we can have some discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. I would like to invite Professor Patel for some remarks.
Yeah, I think very exhaustive presentation which is made by Madam, and she talked about the policies, and I think Ms. Urvashi Prasad from Niti Aayog, she has a hands-on knowledge because she is in touch with what is happening currently. But I think we need to keep in touch with our historical legacy also. It was the Planning Commission of India in the very first 5-year plan when India had adopted family planning policy as a state subject, not as just a birth control with the couples decide. So from there on, women's policy started coming, and there was a very strong relationship of more and more space for women's policies with the changing attitude and the mindset of the bureaucrats, of the politicians, and of the society at large. So we saw that the first 5-year plan started Central Social Welfare Board. That also came as a result of the demand made by 3 women who were managing the refugee camps at the time of partition. It was Mridula Sarabhai, Pushpaben Mehta, and Kamalaben Patel, who who demanded from the Prime Minister that if their families have abandoned these deserted women, it is the duty of the state. This is how Central Social Welfare Board came. And now the scope of it, CSWB, has increased so much that even post-matric scholarships and everything is looked after by that. Second 5-year plans onwards, we saw that creation of Mahila Mandal, the third 5-year plan came up with a massive policy program regarding mother and child, reduction of child mortality and maternal mortality became a very important concern. More and more contraceptive choices that were also placed interventionist technology, surgical methods, and non-surgical methods, they were also implemented. And fourth 5-year plan came up with an extremely huge set of anti-poverty programs. I think, you know, many of in my generation are familiar with the debate we had on poverty. At one level, Nadandikar and Rudd talked about calorie consumption, while the person like Minhas, they also talked about employment generation as an important policy. Fifth 5-year plan, we coincided with the emergency rule where extremely draconian vertically implemented family planning programs were implemented, and there was a massive hue and cry against this kind of a population control method. And we saw that after that, the learnings of this very draconian policy was such that now it is politically unwise to use this kind of method to reduce the population and attain population stabilization. We also realized for the first time that when you depend, how the aid is always not so innocent, okay? You don't get aid from World Bank and IMF without any conditionality. It was the conditionality of population stabilization. And who paid the price of it? It was basically, we see, it's the women, because all the contraceptives and the family population control policies after in a post-emergency period are targeting women. So 6th 5-year plan onwards, one thing good that happened, that there was a debate on towards equality report in the Parliament of India. And for the first time, women were brought out of the rubric of weaker section and the recipient of welfare to the discourse on development, thanks to towards equality report. And we had a separate chapter from 5th to 12th 5-year plan. We had a separate chapter on women and development, with the indicators of development being education, employment, health. And that's what I think our madam also told us about how interventions, policy interventions are made in that direction. After 9th 5-year plan, when the women component plan was being the way we have a scheduled caste plan, tribal sub plan, we should have a women component plan in the developmental investment, where minimum 30% of all development oriented budget should be directed to women. India adopted gender responsive budgeting as a policy in 2005, and the GR by Finance Ministry was sent, and now Niti Aayog is implementing it in a very big way, where we are not only talking about gender responsive budgeting to reduce the gender gap in 5 areas of education, employment, gender-based violence, health, and decision making at every level, family, community, and the larger politics. So I think we have had in terms of, and we also adopted women empowerment policy in the year 2001. And this policy talked about state intervention, state support from womb to tomb, from the time of baby girl is there in her mother's tummy. That means prevention of pre-sex selective abortion, prevention of female infanticide, to all the areas of development in which the state has taken responsibility. And we also have 2016 a draft women's policy, which has been, there have been several roundtables have taken up, but the draft has not translated into a policy. So the areas of which are currently challenged, the last 2 years of pandemic, that has also brought in policy discourse on sharing of household. That has to be, we need to change the mindset, we need to change the gender norms, we need to take care work more seriously. There should be better recognition and reward for care work, child care, elderly care, and all. And the question of mobility has become very important, that why so many degree holders are not able to convert the degree into a career, where the question of safety, not only at the workplace, but also from home to workplace. So these are some of the very important issues. And I think the state and non-state actors both are working in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Urvashi ma'am, would you like to also share your experiences with the participant about the gender responsive budgeting work you have been doing for quite some years in NITI Aayog and how governments are moving towards it? Then we
Yes, yeah, sure. So yeah, I think gender responsive budgeting is again, one of those very progressive policy instruments, but our struggle is to make sure that it is implemented truly in letter and spirit. And what we are trying to do is to ensure that every department and every ministry really understands why it is so important. And it's not done as just a token that, you have to dedicate some amount towards, gender. So you just do that. But to actually integrate it, into their full policy and program cycle. That is what our effort is towards, because gender, as has been rightly said, and I also mentioned, is cross-cutting. Ministry of Urban Development has to look at gender, because, as it was said, that safety for women is not just in their homes or in the workplace, but also in between, right? So in that, whether it is the issue of street lighting, whether it is the issue of public transport, all of this comes under urban development. All of this comes under infrastructure. And yet it has the biggest impact on gender because, women can't go to work, unless they have a safe means of doing so. So we are making efforts to make sure that every department, every ministry truly understands why we need to do this gender budgeting, truly integrates it into their policies and programs, and it doesn't remain tokenism. It's very important that we go beyond tokenism, and we make sure that it's actually implemented in the right spirit. So Department of Disability, for instance, has to look at women with disability and so on. So that's really been our focus.
Thank you. Prakash ji, you want to chip in?
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for this excellent training program. I prepare students for civil services, and I see that students who aspire to be future IAS officers, IPS, IFS are not too sensitive or are not too aware of this particular issue. If you see, more than 2.5 million students appear for these examinations. If we keep a specific module on this particular topic and make it compulsory as a part of the civil services, state civil services examination, I think there can be some more sensitivity towards it. This is just a suggestion, but I think those who aspire to be future administrators and civil servants, they need to be sensitized. And Madam very rightly pointed out that those who are going to make the policies and implement the policies should be more sensitized and made more responsible. So this is just a suggestion. We can directly reach out to 2.5 million students every year. I think that's something really substantial.
Very, very important. Yeah.
Would you like to comment, Urvashi?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that's what I was mentioning, that, even if you talk about the police force, you have to sensitize them to deal with women's issues. So similarly, with the bureaucracy, with the judiciary, any form really of the executive or the legislature or the judiciary, they need to be sensitized. And I think that is something which should be integrated. It should be a part. In fact, I have always advocated that right from schools, gender should be a part of the curriculum so that, everybody has exposure to this because your education is not complete, unless you are sensitized to gender related issues. So I think that is something that we, have to move towards. And if others take up this initiative, then it will be a very positive initiative. But we certainly have to ensure that from the government side also it gets integrated into the curriculum, into the training processes.
Momita Deji. Momita Deji, you can speak. Are you able to hear us, Momita Deji? Okay. Sorry, can you read out the question by Momita Ji?
Yeah, sure. The question is, ma'am, in India, single working mother face a lot of problems. Don't you think that we need to think about policies to create childcare infrastructure in their working place to make their way a little easier for them?
Yes, I agree. So Maternity Benefit Act does talk a little bit about the child infrastructure in workplaces. It also talks about creches. In fact, it has made creches, if you have a certain number of employees and over that, then creches are mandatory. So I think there is some talk about it, but we need to look at what else we can do. But like I said, that a lot of this, rather than it being mandated by policy and mandated by legislature, if it can come from companies themselves, if it can come from employers themselves, then it can be far more effective. Because if we keep mandating too many things, then like I said, there could be an unintended consequence that employers shy away from employing women altogether. So we have to have a fine balance in the policy and legislative space in terms of how much we mandate. So I think we can certainly do more, and we should do more. But I also think that the employers themselves need to take this up very consciously and very seriously, and make sure that they provide a conducive environment for men and women to work. Because ultimately, for employers, they should be concerned about productivity, and whatever helps to enhance the productivity of an employee, they must invest in that. So that is something I think is equally important. As much as you need policy measures, you also need employers to come forward and to themselves put in place a conducive environment for such working mothers.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Patel, would you like to add some more comments?
Yeah, I would like to add that in Bombay, we did a study on the childcare facilities, and we also visited the crashes provided by the corporate world. There were hardly 1 or 2 children, especially those who had their own transport, the women who owned car, and they took their children along. But in an overcrowded train, women found it very difficult to take the children along. So community-based, so let us be flexible when we talk about crash. No, it is not only at the workplace, but even community-based crashes. Like in earlier, the government had supported crash at the important railway stations, no, where we had a crash at Dadar. So women would take the children up to the railway station, and where there was a very nicely maintained crash by the Indian Railways, no, and they were keeping children there. So I think different models of this thing, location of the crash should be according to the local needs of the people. So after the micro planning and micro studies, that we can decide, but there should be more flexibility in the design of the crash scheme. And I think that is what is demanded by there is a provision in the crash scheme, but there is not much awareness. There is not much publicity that state is providing centrally sponsored scheme for establishment of crash. Even the community-based organizations and the citizens organizations can also start crash, and they can send the proposal to the Ministry of Women and Child Development for the crash.
Thank you, ma'am, for the comments. And I would like to thank Ms. Urvashi once again for being with us and sharing your insights. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Very good.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Very useful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we will move on to the last and the third session of our training program for today. I would like to invite our next distinguished expert, Dr. Nivedita P. Haran. Dr. Haran is former additional Chief Secretary, Government of Kerala. We welcome you, ma'am, to this training program and kindly take over the session.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Arjun. Thank you for, first of all, thanks for inviting me for a webinar on such an important subject, women's rights, laws and policies in India. A lot of talks are held on this subject, but I think we need more and more. And we need more and more because this is a topic and this is a subject which you just cannot emphasize enough. You need to go on speaking about it again and again for at least for two reasons. One, because a lot of women have come into the workplace in the past, let's say 30, 40 years. My generation, I think most of my friends had a career. They had a work outside home also. And second reason being that we talk about the demographic dividend, but do we talk about the demographic dividend from the point of view of the gender bifurcation? How will it impact on the girls who are, the large number of girls and women who are coming into the world, who are going to be educated, to be gainfully engaged and gainfully employed? Now, I was in the government for almost 37 years, so I will try and bring in the perspective of the government, the perspective from the government angle, the women who are there. And even among that, I will try to talk about the women who are working in the, let's say, the grade 3, grade 4 levels, the women who are working as personal secretaries, as assistants, as section officers, who are not so vociferous in bringing forth cases which they face in personal life or which come to their notice. Now, for such women, I think the Vishakha judgment came as a godsend. It was very, very important for the women of this strata because Vishakha judgment talked about formulating and finding effective measures to check the problem of harassment, not just sexual harassment, but other forms of harassment, which could border on sexual harassment for women at the workplaces. Now, Vishakha was in a way a culmination. And I'm sure the other speakers would be touching on that, and therefore I won't go into that in detail. But from what I remember, the Act of 2013 came after Vishakha. The Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, and Redressal Act 2013, which came after the Vishakha Act, but pre-Vishakha. Don't think that sexual harassment was not an offense and that women had no form of redressal. They did. The IPC provided for it. And then we had a few judgments from different courts in the country, including the apex courts. And directions were given to the government about ensuring that the women's safety, security is taken care of. And based on that, it culminated in the Act of 2013. Now, this, I think I'll go into that a little later, but I have to also mention that in present times, the importance of this issue has become even more crucial, because not only because more and more women have come into the workplace, but also because there are more and more methods of harassment that have come forth. For instance, when I was collector, I was a young subdivisional officer. We didn't have the problem of social media, cyber security, harassing people through the Facebook, etc., etc. But now you do. Similarly, over phone, WhatsApp chats, unwanted calls. These were not there at that time. We didn't have the smartphone. And therefore, so as new technology comes in, newer and newer modes of harassment have come to the fore. Now, as you would know, in every office, based on the Act, every office in the government is required to have a standing committee regarding such cases. So any girl, any woman who faces anything bordering on harassment, which she finds it offensive and which would be offensive according to her, should be placed before this standing committee. It is also required that this standing committee, after a preliminary inquiry, should ensure that there is an FIR filed. And that is very important, that every woman has a right to legal recourse, and that legal recourse should be handheld into obtaining through the standing committee. It is also necessary in the government that along with the criminal case, there should also be a departmental inquiry. And that is, and the two can go in parallel. There is nothing to prevent the departmental inquiry from proceeding when the criminal case is still in force, which is still under investigation. And that is an important aspect I want to mention here, is that often I have found that cases like this, when the inquiry is ordered, there is a tendency on the part of the officer who has been posted as the inquiry officer to take the stand that since a criminal case is in progress, the investigation in the departmental case can await the criminal case. That is actually not correct. That is wrong, because the law requires that the departmental inquiry is totally independent of the criminal inquiry. There have been cases, and I can quote, I can mention them, they come to my mind, where in the criminal case, the individual could have been let free, but the departmental inquiry has found the person guilty of the offense, and therefore action has been taken against the person. The person has the right to again approach the court. Those are different issues. But what I want to say here is that the two are independent of each other. I started by mentioning that I'm going to focus on the women who are posted in positions where they are more prone to harassment. And I talk about the positions like assistant to someone, personal assistants, personal secretaries. These are very important positions, but these are also positions which can be very sensitive from the women's security point of view. And I will give you one example. This is a case of an officer who was from the civil service, but he was a promoting officer from the state services. And his personal secretary had made a complaint to the chief secretary that she was being harassed, not only harassed, there was an attempt to molest her. And after she had complained and tried to take recourse to some kind of redressal, the person, the individual, the so-called accused, was trying to put the blame on her and also make sure that there is action taken against her. So the inquiry, I was one of the senior most IAS officers there, and I was also the revenue commissioner. And this lady was the PS to an officer who was not directly my subordinate, but as a sub-collector, as a deputy collector, I wrote his CR for that matter. So the inquiry came to me, and I'm quoting this case because this is an important case and this has stuck in my mind. I followed the procedure, took the statement of the complainant, took the statement, listened to the alleged accused, and after this was over, and I was in the process of writing my report and submitting my report, the alleged accused, he came to meet me. He came to my office, went to my personal secretary, and told him that he wanted to meet Madam for a few minutes. So when I was told that he wants to meet me, I asked that since he has already made a statement, if he has something more to give, he may do so in writing, because otherwise it will not be correct. So with that, I thought that the matter was over. But within 10 minutes, I was going out of my office and he accosted me in the stairway. And he said that, Madam, I know that you don't believe what I said. And therefore, I feel that you need to listen to me once again. My response was that I have heard her, I have heard you, and therefore that there is nothing more that you have to say on this matter, and you have to leave it to my judgment. There is nothing that I can discuss with you at this point in time. This man, this altercation, this kind of conversation happened. I got into my car and I left. This man then gave a petition to the Chief Secretary, in which he said that he had happened to meet me, and I had said, quote unquote, that you need not say anything further. I know what had transpired. Okay. That is a statement which I do not remember making. I don't think I would have said that. I'm very careful on these matters. That I know what had transpired. Now, he took the stand that since I was making that statement, I was already biased against him, and therefore I should not be allowed to continue with the inquiry. Now, meanwhile, the matter was getting more and more serious because he was sending threatening notes to this lady, as a result of which, on my recommendation, she was provided with her presence in the office. She was provided with security. That is, she could ask for security anytime she wanted if she felt that anyone was following her, etc. And we told her to not venture out alone for a while until the case was sorted out. Now, matters reached a head when my inquiry report was submitted, in which, for your information, I had found him definitely guilty on all the 3 charges that were framed against him. And therefore, I had recommended very strong action as a departmental procedure against him, which included reduction in his level, in his seniority. He went to court, and I wanted to mention this case because his stand throughout, he never took a stand about the contents of the inquiry, the arguments in the report. His only stand was that I had said that I know what had happened. I knew what had transpired, and therefore I was biased. You see, that is the kind of, I should say, confusion that is often tried to be created by such persons. And therefore, the point I'm trying to make for the participants of this webinar is that you need to make sure that whenever something of this nature happens, you, if possible, note it down. Note down the points, bulleted points, as to what happened on such and such date, who tried to do what, anyone tried to touch you, molest you, send you bad messages, foul messages, note it down. The factual information is very important, whether it is the actual occurrence and the date and time. The second thing which is important is that do not hold back facts before an inquiry authority. Because what I had found is that the lady who, when I was inquiring, in the first instance, she was not sure how much she should reveal during the inquiry. And that was actually weakening her case considerably. And therefore, the advice that I have is that don't hold back facts. Make it known to the inquiry officer all that happened. And after all, you are in the right. And that's my final point, that when you are in the right, do not let the other party be aggressive and hijack the matter in a manner that is actually going to be what he tried to do, what this man tried to do was to delay matters. It would go on and on. It's another matter. He went to court, tried to get a stay. He did not get it. And therefore, do not let that be done in cases that happen. I know I very briefly also want to mention a case that came to my notice when I was in the UN as an administrator. And another case which had come to my notice was of a similar nature, but that was a little more complicated. And there again, what I found, even though it was outside the country, and we feel that outside the country things are probably much better, it is not much better, and as bad in the UN as anywhere else. And this girl was actually being harassed through her messages, through posts, through emails, etc., etc. And when she tried to take action against the person, and the person, accused person was actually an international officer, a UN officer from a different country. I'm not mentioning the country. And I inquired into it. And what I found is that in such cases, the attempt is, the attempt is made as if because the person comes from a developed country or a developed background, and the other person, the respondent, is from a less economically well-off position, therefore she is trying to take advantage of him. That is again a ruse that some of these accused persons often take. I think one has to keep that upfront in one's mind. And many of you in your future may become inquiry officers. So I would like you to keep these things in mind when you do an inquiry, that apart from the actual crux of the case, there are many other things that are surrounding it, which should also be not lost sight of. That is important. I finally want to mention to you that it is the police in our country, I think in many of the larger cosmopolitan cities, has now set up cybersecurity cells. They also have women-run police stations, which is important. Which is important for the simple reason that many of these women would not go to the police because they would like to speak to a woman. And one should not lower the importance of it. And therefore, we should take advantage of these cybersecurity cells, of these women's police stations, because one of the ways in which they would become empowered and knowledgeable would be when they handle such cases. Unfortunately, not many cases come before them now, but once they start coming, they would have a good body of such cases. They would also be able to handle such cases much better and with much more empathy. I think I'll stop here. I have given a few examples, but I am very, very happy that IMPRI is holding a webinar of this nature. And I can see that there are participants from every strata. That is extremely important and extremely crucial, because we need to see this problem from all perspectives. And we need to make sure that women's safety remains a non-negotiable thing, which nobody should take it for granted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Would you like to illustrate your any of your experiences of regional nature? Meaning by we want to say something about South India, North India, East India, something that sort.
I think there'll be others. Arjun will be talking about that. I think I've spoken for almost 15-20 minutes now. That's already, I think you can cut down on some of it. Don't keep too much of it if you think it irrelevant.
Great. Thank you, ma'am.
I would like to thank ma'am for the presentation. Now I would invite Professor Patel for her remarks. Ma'am, over to you.
So I think Dr. Nivedita Haran's presentation about perspectives on legal challenges for women in local bureaucracy. I think that right from, if you, Suman Devi Bajaj's experience of the super co-op, or it is basically what comes out with all the illustrations that she has given is about the power of position, power of where you are in the hierarchy, political power, and she also talked about the global issues where rich countries, if the harasser is from a rich country and the complainer is from a poor country, she is always accused. So there is a psychology of victim blaming that is happening. So I think most important learning from her lecture is that we need to take a principled position wherever you are, wherever you are in the power hierarchy. You can't compromise, you can't behave like a deaf and mute. You have to take stand against any form of sexual harassment that takes place. She gave such a moving personal testimony that even at a person like her, IAS officer, at such enjoying so much of power and position, she also had to face when the harasser, the kind of retaliatory behavior that, and I have also personally explained that even when I was managing, I was in the Women Development Cell of Mumbai University, all those, whenever there was a complaint against, say, class 3, class 4 employees, it was very easy to institute inquiry and also get the support in favor of victim. But when the principal or dean or the registrar or HODs, when they were accused, they used their power to subvert the justice system. And that's why the law has also, as Albertina told us yesterday, that when the internal complaints committee doesn't give you justice, you have a recourse of going to local, what is it called, local inquiry committee. And other thing is, even if that is not giving you this, as it happened in case of, say, DAY3 case, or when it happened with the Tehelka case, you can also file a criminal complaint. So that is also, so there are certain this thing, but at the same time, societal attitude of victim blaming, double standard of sexual morality, and so many outcomes of the testimonies that we have read about Me Too movement, that in spite of many, many years of struggle, a woman loses her credibility, or she gets isolated. Everyone in the office stop talking to her. But the accused, he gets his pension, he gets his promotion. So those type of episodes also we have seen, and that's why it is very important that it is not only knowing about the law, okay, but also using this law judiciously wherever we are, even as a citizen, even as a people in the management committee of the society, or at the workplace, wherever political bodies where you are active. Main thing is that not only knowledge for not knowledge sake doesn't take us anywhere. Knowledge for gender equality, knowledge for social justice, knowledge for gender equity, they become very important. So wherever we are, we must try to reduce the gap between whatever we have learned about the legal rights and policies. The Constitution is progressive, policies are there. All the 9 presentations gave such a detailed explanation of what all our country has given. And India is a very throbbing, we have a multi-party system. But main thing is that along with the perspective building, correct perspective building on gender equality, we also need to stick out our neck through our writing, through our conversations, through our demystification, the way yesterday Albertina and Madam Ain did, the way they demystified the law. Why should we make things so complicated? That's very important. The program was started with the belief that knowledge empowers, but use of knowledge for gender equality brings social transformation. So along the journey can start from us. We have to see to it that, and we must be sensitive to our own privileges, that we have a privilege of education, privilege of position, privilege of employment, better quality of employment, privilege of verbal articulation, and we should use this privilege to see to it that we are able to we are able to establish the ecosystem of gender equity and equality. With this, I think I would like to thank the participants, all resource persons and the IMPRI team for this collective endeavor with such a lucid, seamless 3 days of immersive online legal awareness and certificate training course. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Before we conclude the session, there are few questions. Would you like to take some?
Yeah. The
Okay, ma'am.
questions we have seen, family as a basic unit, and this. So we have taken that because these are the questions of the previous speaker, and all
Yes,
have been answered. The Ipshita Mitra's comment is about thank you, IMPRI, for organizing such an enriching program, feeling rich in thoughts. Gratitude to all field experts and resource persons. Thoroughly enjoyed each and every presentation and lecture. Looking forward to attending more such seminars and discussion. So this is the comment. And earlier questions have been taken care of because I was also continuously. So whatever the resource persons did not answer, I had tried to take care of them in my responses. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Ma'am, can I ask?
Yeah, Bin.
Question? Yes, ma'am. And I just wanted to ask that, I would like to first of all thank you for this very wonderful sessions that were curated, and it basically dealt with all these relevant issues that we face. So
Yeah.
one thing, my issue is that with regard, I would like to ask you this question. Because you're part of the women's movement, leading from the front, etc. So, what would you say that? Do you think that women's movement? One of the reasons that we are, I'm not saying we are obsolete, but we are, we tend to be irrelevant or not really being able to make the right. The right, what shall I say, the correct things that have to be done. Is it also because there is some sort of support system, like how Nivedita ma'am was telling? Now this is one thing that a woman, when they try to put a brave front, and when they are taking a stand, so who are there to stand in solidarity with her? Like if we look at the Western world, one of the reasons why the feminist activities, whether the second wave or anything, the success was also the fact that they were able to mobilize and bring everyone on the same platform. So here, this distinct difference between the academicians and the activists, each with their own issues. So isn't there some way that we offer support in a solid manner and stand with that person till the end? Because these are individuals that we are talking about. Ma'am, I'm just asking this with utter humility, because I know that you people are experts and you've done many things for women's rights.
Yeah. See, my generation became active in the social movement in their I was 15 when I joined, okay? And I think I was not alone. There were so many young men and women who are active in it. So I fully endorse your point that there is a strength in unity. And if there are more people, there is strength in number. And that's why the second wave of feminism, even the first wave also, I would say, was about, because women in freedom fighters, they were also united. They were also had a massive backing of the support. What has happened currently is that you speak politically correct language, you have a set of laws and policies, but everyone is individuated. Everything is individuated. And that individualism, which has come because of the neoliberal way of thinking, and especially the academic feminists, you hardly see any, it is only obsession about papers and number of papers you have written and number of books you have published and all. But at a community level, if you work, like whenever I go for a Panchayati Raj training, I get a lot of moral boost, because these things are not reported in the papers, or there is no academician is written about what's happening at that level. But you see a lot of sisterhood and solidarity. If widows of farmers, if they come up with the SHG and they say that our SHG will not give loan for dowry, our SHG will not give loan for sex selective abortion, our SHG will not give loan for ostentatious marriage. Our SHG will give loan only for children's education, for the health needs, housing needs. I think it's a qualitative lift, because these are the women who were not even, who were not given any space or voice, and they are working. You can see at the level of collective endeavor, at the local self-government level, at the panchayat level, you see a lot of such collective efforts are taking place to change their micro world. But I think the kind of a national level movements and all, I think you don't find them. My generation is aging, okay? I am also in the late 60s. I'm 68 years old. So you can imagine last 50 years of our involvement in the women's movement. And we have seen wherever there were collective efforts, we could bring changes. And that's why everywhere the journey started from an individual woman. Yesterday's all case studies showed that how individual women fought against it. But then they ended up bringing social changes and the transformations also in the laws and policy, which currently is at a top level, at a Niti Aayog level, or at a legislative or the judicial route. These are the two routes by which we get the new policies and new laws that is happening. But the collective effort of grassroots movement, it happened at the time of Nirbhaya, okay? Nirbhaya tragedy. In response to that, the younger generation spontaneously came out, no, using social media. So the methods of protest and methods of solidarity have also changed in today's circumstances. But I think whatever is our location, I think the change has to begin from us. And we should use our tongue power, our lung power, our power of pen, our power of articulation, our power of analysis to reach out. And that's why you have seen that in last 2 years of pandemic, continuously IMPRI gender series was constantly taking up the day-to-day unfolding reality that was there, and we were bringing the practitioners on the panel, and they were the persons who were discussing the issue. And then when we put our head together, we can also find better solution.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the concluding remarks and having a very lively discussion with all of us. Now, I would move on to the vote of thanks. As we come to end of last day of this 3-day immersive online legal awareness and certificate training program on women's rights, laws, and policies in India, I, Dr. Sauravi Himire, would like to propose formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center. We are very grateful to our experts for this training course, Professor Saumya Uma, Adv Sanchita Ain, Professor Vishal Narain, Advocate Dr. Albertina Almeida, Dr. Amal Jasani, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, Ms. Urvashi Prasad, Professor Vijayalakshmi Nanda, Dr. Nivedita P. Haran, and our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and were actively involved in this 3-day training program. Thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts in understanding issues concerning laws, rights, and policies of women in India, which we believe must have benefited all the participants immensely. For the certificates, we'll be sharing a feedback form for you to provide your details for the certificates and obtaining your feedbacks and suggestions. Kindly mention your name correctly for the purpose of handing out the certificates. We have shared the recorded video of the training program in your email for your kind perusal in case you have missed the live sessions. Thanks to the organizing team IMPRI, Gender and Impact Studies Center, for conducting the whole session in a smooth manner. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI web policy talk and web policy learning and to reading our publications. Good evening and thank you.